Welcome to Blind Prog 102, a literary analysis of disability representation in Final Fantasy XIV, presented to you by myself, Eos, otherwise known as Sara. I'm originally from Coral, but hello everyone from Diablos, thank you for that awesome space, and this is LunarCon 2023. Now, as I mentioned in the panel room, after the panel is over, I will step outside the room so that the next person can use it, and we can hang out in the garden or on the path just outside. I'll be doing a Q&A afterwards, because I can't really follow chat that well while I'm speaking. I am legally blind myself, so this is a little bit difficult for me. I'm trying to multiple screen this here with text-to-speech, so that can always get pretty tricky. All right, so who am I? I am a cosplayer. I do art. I've been playing Final Fantasy XIV for 4 or 5 years now. Started around the pandemic-ish in 5.x, before the expansion of the free trial. So I can't remember what patch it was. I think it was 5.3. Yes, that's to be about 4 years now. And I love it. And for the most part, I can play as a visually impaired person. There are some, areas where it's a little difficult for me. I talked about that last year, and that panel is both still on LunarCon's official Twitch page as well as on YouTube with subtitles. Now, I am legally blind, and I have a lot of trouble writing up subtitles as well as using Twitch and OBS, so I do apologize, but I will work with the person who subtitled last year to make sure that this panel is subtitled in post in YouTube. So if anyone is having issues with that, I apologize for the live stream. We will make sure that that is taken care of later on for the release on YouTube. Another fun fact, no, I don't work for Square. I have never worked for Square. I have done some consulting on blind and other disability functions. My only claim to fame is that I named the Square Pride mascot. So that is Mina, and that is the actual official art from the Final Fantasy IX artist that they mailed to me from Japan, to say thank you for naming their mascot. Mina is the Japanese word for everyone, and I figured that Mina, who uses they, them, can represent everybody. So it's really cool, and all of their Pride merch, 100% of the profits goes to Pride charities, which is a big reason why I'm very gung-ho about it. They're not making a profit off of this. All of that money is going to Stonewall, which is a really cool Pride charity. So, one more thing, speaking of charities, is that LunarCon is raising money for Extra Life, and some of the prizes are prizes I am providing. You'll notice that the $5 and $10 charity raffle tiers, that means if you donate $5 or if you donate $10, you are entered into those raffles. $5 or more, you can enter to win a custom face mask of an Ascian of your choice, as long as they have a seal that I can embroider. Those are all hand embroidered, and at $10 or more, a full set of 20, not just the 9 you see here, one for every job, set of buff and debuff patches for every job that's currently available in game. Also embroidered. There are 2 masks up for grabs, 3 sets of patches up for grabs, and there's lots of other amazing prizes too. So definitely check out Extra Life, donate, 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 and you might even win something from me. So what this panel isn't. So it's not a review of mechanics. We did that last year. Like I said, that panel is available online. You can check that out on Twitch, or if you need subtitles, on YouTube. It's not a universal experience across the board. People take different things away from different characters. So what I may consider a good disability representation might not be agreed with by other people, and vice versa, unless I'm citing sources or if I'm talking about something more of the scientific or biological side. There are a lot of things in here that are more opinion-based, but they are based on, storytelling tropes and understanding how stories structure and function. And most importantly, this is not a value judgment on whether a character itself is likable, simply how their disabilities are handled by the story and the writers. So, regardless of my opinion on whether I like these disabled characters, such as Y'shtola, such as Arnvald, etc., it's not a value judgment of whether I like them or not. This is not a I don't like your waifu or I love your waifu thing. This is purely, did the writers handle their disabilities well? Cool? So this is a bash-free zone, but I will be making some pointed criticism about how certain disability aspects were handled in the story. Why not talk about disability as a whole? The big reason is there's two of them. One, I want to focus entirely on disabilities that are explicit in the text. There are a lot of characters in Final Fantasy XIV where people headcanon that they have certain disabilities. That's awesome, especially if you can relate to them and you see them in your fanfic or fan art. That's great. But that is outside the text, and I don't want to speak about that here. I want to speak about disabilities that are explicitly called out by the text, even if they don't specifically say this person is disabled. If they say this person cannot do X or Y, I am going to count that. So I know a lot of people, for example, consider a lot of the Heavensward Ishgardian characters to have some form of PTSD. I can absolutely see that. And PTSD is a disability. But because it's not explicitly stated in the text, I don't want to cover that here. So I am going to mostly be covering physical disabilities where we can clearly discern that this person has a specific set of hardships and how the text handles those hardships. But latter, I don't want to touch Arnvald. I think he's a really interesting character. I think there's a lot that can be said here about his story and his path, but as someone who is not a wheelchair user, I don't feel like I am the person to talk about that. I would rather hand that over to someone who does regularly use a wheelchair, and notice my terminology here, wheelchair user, not wheelchair bound, because that's really bad, outdated terminology. But he uses a wheelchair because his legs have difficulty functioning. But I don't feel confident or comfortable speaking about that because I am not someone who regularly uses a wheelchair. And I'll get back to that point in a bit, because just because I'm not doesn't mean I haven't used one. And there is a difference, and I will get into that and why. So, as that stands, I'm going to only focus on two things. I'm going to focus on blindness, and I'm going to focus on disability more generally, as well as some fantasy disabilities, where it's very clear that they are disabled, but it's not a disability that we have in the real world. In other words, I'm going to be talking about FanCrit a little bit. Please note, from here on out, I'm going to be discussing some story spoilers through 6.1. This is your first, last, and only warning about this. I'm going to keep it out of context as much as necessary, but if you don't want any spoilers to that point, this is your time to walk away, play a little bit more of the MSQ, come back to this when you are ready. Sorry, I'm just catching up on chat, so give me one moment because I need to use text-to-speech. Please roast my waifu. Oh no, I don't want to roast anybody's waifu. But yes, so, like, again, this is your first, last, and only warning. I will be talking about some stuff through 6.1. This will all be, unlike last year where it was a mechanics panel, this is a story panel. There will be a couple story beats that I will have to spoil. And also, I know it's a 7-year-old game, and I've just aged some people in the audience by saying this, but I am going to be talking about Final Fantasy XV as a point of comparison very briefly. So, again, for those of you who haven't played it, it is not as old as Final Fantasy XIV, but it is still a 7-year-old game. I am going to be discussing one of the characters there. Again, this is a spoiler warning for that too, so if that concerns you, I would also say step out. But for those of you who are still here, let's move on. And let's talk about what blindness is before I get further in. And I'm going to be making a couple of tangents to just get you guys understanding some basic points so we're all on the same page before I move into my literary analysis section. By which I mean I'm going to be citing the U.S. tax code. Hooray! Now, blindness means different things in different countries. It does not mean the same thing in Japan. I actually went to a Japanese university, and stuff like ADA just simply does not exist there. But I'm using the American tax code just to give us all a baseline, because when blind people talk about blindness, at least here in the US, I cannot speak to Japan, this is what we mean. Blindness is a central visual acuity of 20 over 200 or less. Basically what that means is that 20 over 20 vision means that if a person with 20/20 vision stands 20 feet away from an object and they look at that object, like let's say it's, I don't know, a book with varying sizes of text on it, and maybe they can read the cover and maybe the byline, but not anything lower than that. What they see from 20 feet away is their baseline. Now, if they stepped to 200 feet away and looked at that book again and could describe it to you, that's what somebody with 20 over 200 blindness sees from 20 feet away. So that's step one of blindness. If someone is 20 over 200 or worse, or has 20 degrees of vision or less, then they are considered blind by the US. That does not mean total blindness. Total blindness is something that you guys are probably familiar with. That means that they can't see anything at all. But there is a period between total blindness and sight that is considered still blind. I fall into this category. My eyesight is 20 degrees or less. But can still see some things. So I can see some shape and color. I actually can't read this text on my large screen computer sitting back a foot away. I can see that there's bolded areas, but that's it. I would not be able to read this out to you. Not unless I stepped about an inch away from the screen. And that's important because a disability aid does not necessarily equal a disability. Remember I said before that I'm not a wheelchair user, but that doesn't mean I haven't been in a wheelchair? There are other uses for disability aids that don't necessarily mean that you have a disability or that specific disability. In certain airports in the US, because I am disabled and need an assist to walk through the airport, they require me to sit in a wheelchair, even though I do not have a disability that requires me to use a wheelchair. Sorry, I'm just keeping an eye on time. My disability has nothing to do with my legs functioning or not functioning. However, in order for me to function within the airport and to receive the service that they are providing me, I have to be seated in a wheelchair and be pushed around. I can't self-ambulate. I don't know how to use a wheelchair because I'm not a wheelchair user. It's not something I use on my regular basis. But that doesn't mean I haven't used it, or people who have just come out of the hospital. Likewise, glasses does not necessarily mean you are blind. Lots of people wear glasses, and lots of glasses help fix your eyes, or at least adjust yourself to being able to see. What this means in practice is, going back to that description, there was another piece that's important here. With the use of correcting lens, if your blindness can be corrected by glasses, you are not blind, at least not in the United States. The term, oh, I'm legally blind without my glasses, well, then you're not legally blind because you have easy access to glasses. If you would be not legally blind after a surgery, but you haven't had it, you are still considered legally blind, though. Surgery is not the same thing. You can't just pick up a surgery and put it on your face very easily. There's no easy access to surgery. Or if you are in a situation where you would not be able to have access to glasses, say in a pre-industrial society, yeah, you'd still be legally blind. Even though glasses could correct you, you didn't have access to them. So a disability aid doesn't necessarily mean that you have the disability associated with it. Lots of people use glasses, but you are not necessarily blind if you're a regular glasses user, even if you would be without them. I'm actually tested after my eyes are corrected. They only test, I actually just 3 weeks ago had to go for an eye exam. They don't even test me if I'm not wearing my glasses. So that's the difference, and that's a thing that a lot of people don't realize. That doesn't mean that disability aids don't help people with disabilities. It's just a distinction that a lot of people aren't aware of. And the reason why I bring these up is they will come back later, and you'll see why I'm putting you in that mindset now of what these things mean. Now, as far as the literary analysis side, there's two main ways that we see disabilities in storytelling, as far as I've categorized them. I know some other people categorize them slightly differently. The first way is characters who are already disabled when they're introduced in the story. These are characters who exist in the world who are already disabled, Toph being a good example. And I'm going to take a moment just to back read chat to see if there's any questions that I need to answer. So what does it mean to have 20 degrees of vision? So that question is, what does it mean to have 20 degrees of vision? Basically, how far to the sides your eyes can see. 20 degrees or fewer basically means that you have no peripheral vision. You can only see straight ahead. You have to physically turn your head to see to the sides. All right. Any other questions before I move on? So the person who's asking, how do they know what glasses to give you? So once I'm tested with my glasses, they then pull down this device to check, based on my existing prescription, how much they need to adjust, adding little lenses here and there. How they tested me when I was an infant, since my disease is genetic and I've had it since birth, I actually do not know how they test an infant. I do know that I've been wearing glasses strapped to my head since I was less than a year old. No, it's not the strongest they can make, because basically what they're trying to do is get it to the point where I can see things as clear as I can, but that doesn't necessarily mean I can see things better. Like I can, even with my glasses, I can only read two or three lines on the letter chart. Beyond that, it's not that they're blurry. They just simply do not exist. My eyes cannot detect them. And catching up. All right, so I think I've answered every question in the chat, so I'm going to move forward. So yes, characters already disabled. And they serve a different purpose than the other category, which we'll be talking about in a bit, where if you can assume this is characters already disabled, the other category is, of course, characters disabled by the story. So, first category. What is the point? The big point of characters that have disabilities that already exist in the world are to shine a light, are basically twofold. One is diversity and complexity of the world, just like disabled people exist in the same way that, you know, there are men and women, there are people of different ethnicities, people of different cultures. Some people just are disabled. I know that sounds very simple and reductive, but it's true, and a lot of people tend to forget that. How many blind people have you physically met in your lifetime? A lot of people, the answer is 0. They may have just never met somebody who's blind. And having these people in the world just remind you that, you know, this is a complex world. People like that just exist. In those cases, their disability may never come up in the story, and that's fine. They don't need to. Like, that's not a part of their character growth. It's just they're a person who happens to be disabled. But there is a third category, and that's real-world issues, and in that case, they may already be disabled, but also be sort of a proxy for the author to touch on some real-world issues. It could be the disability itself, or it could be some kind of issue of, like, access. I know we talked about before with airports being can be very inaccessible places. A lot of public places really aren't accessible. There was a really cool documentary about somebody who is a wheelchair user just trying to get a bagel in New York City, and just how difficult it is because so few stores have a ramp and they're slightly raised up off the sidewalk. So how do you get into a shop when you can't step over a 2-inch, jump. And in those kinds of cases, somebody already being disabled can shine a light on those. But then the other half is characters who are disabled by the narrative, like Hiccup and Toothless here. Now, if an author is going to go through the process of actually disabling a character within the narrative, then there needs to be a follow-through, because otherwise, why disable that character? Why put them in that situation? A lot of the hand-waviness that you can have of like, oh, this character just happens to be disabled, goes away when a author takes the time to disable a character in the narrative. They're making an active decision to take a character who was not disabled and make them disabled. And in those cases, you can still have the social issues that I said in the first one. How does society see this same character now that something has changed about them? Now that they have lost their hearing, or now that they have lost their eyesight, or lost a limb, or can't function in some way that they used to. But a lot of the times, this sort of disabling of a character is used as a character growth moment. I don't know whether or not I always agree with that, because disabling a character can sometimes feel very cheap, but it can be done well. Edward Elric, Toothless, and Hiccup, those are all great examples where I think that the representation is mostly positive. So, we're now going to talk about some Final Fantasy characters. Mostly 14, but that 115 character I was speaking about. First, let's talk about somebody who was blind before the narrative. And that is my boy, Shamani Lamani, who I think is probably one of the best representations of blindness in a JRPG, just straight up. And there's a couple of reasons why. Let me go forward. So, here's some traits that I consider good traits of an appropriately power-scaled disabled character. Not just blind character, but disabled character in general. His power set makes sense. You don't see it directly, not until Endwalker, but he was a member of the Company of Heroes. He was a combatant, but his power and his power and abilities do not exceed that of other people of his station. He is not Mary levels, Sue levels of power. He is quite competent and quite skilled in what he does, but he is not considered exceptional. And there can be exceptional disabled people, don't get me wrong, but he is another person living in the world. And he has some cool things about him, but it's not because he's blind. He just happens to be a Company of Heroes person who is blind. A very good vintner who is blind. There's no over-obvious tells. Like, he doesn't scream at you, I'm blind, I'm blind, I'm blind, repeatedly. He does mention it once. He does say, oh, I noticed that you saw my sunglasses. But he's brought it up. It's part of the world. And then it's not that it's forgotten. It's still very present on him. He never not wears his sunglasses. But he doesn't scream at you every 5 minutes. On the same token, his disability isn't a secret. He doesn't go and do all these cool things and then say, oh, by the way, I'm blind. No, it's a part of him in the same way that his hair is blonde and he is a lalafell. And he's not a piteous character. His story, he has a bit of a tragic story. They were a member of the Company of Heroes. The company disbanded. But his story is no more or less tragic than the other members of the company. Again, he is treated as just another person in the world who just happens to be blind. And it's the same thing that I say about, well, how do you write good female characters? I'm like, okay, so that guy character that you just wrote, yeah, that one who, does X, Y, and Z and, is loved by his friends and family and does some cool stuff, but isn't a show-off, yeah, just change your pronouns. Congrats, you've written an awesome female character. Not everybody needs to be shouting to the rooftops about how special they are. That can be true. You can do some really cool stuff with that. But it's nice to see just, hey, dude in the world, he does some cool stuff. He's good at some things. He's bad at some things. Oh, he happens to be blind. Awesome. I can't talk any more about him because there's not much else to say. Because when somebody's written well, and competently, they're, like, I'm done. Like, there's nothing to nitpick here. And I'm going to do that again one more time with another character who is blinded by the narrative. That being Ignis from Final Fantasy XV. I told you I'd bring up the pretty boys. And he's done mostly right. There's some issues I have with the DLC, but I'm just talking base game here. We're not going to go into that. So some traits of a appropriately power-scaled blind character, especially one who is blinded by the narrative, he does have some issues on first blindness. Right after he's blinded, he does stumble and trip a lot. That's understandable. Someone who has relied on their eyesight their entire life to function and suddenly loses it, that is a very common thing. They're going to have some issues tripping and stumbling. But he's not going out of, like, he's not inflicting damage on his party members. He's just missing a little bit more when he's fighting. And he does learn to cope and adjust over time. Late in the story, after a couple of years have passed, you haven't been able to cook with him once he's blinded because he can't cook without being able to see, like right after he's blinded. But you get him back later in the story, and the cooking menu does open up again, and every option that you had learned early in the story has come back because Ignis has learned to adjust with his blindness, and he can cook again. Again, nothing out of the ordinary. His power level is pretty relatively the same as it was before. Cooking is a skill blind people can do. He just needed to relearn it. And that scene, just the fact that the cooking window opened up and the options were there again after, you know, so the story goes, he has just been blinded, and the few chapters that happen after are right after one another. So we're talking over the course of a few days. Then there's a time skip 5 years, and then this happens. I actually cried. I don't cry very much from games, but the mere fact that, you know, that they realized that, you know, in 5 years, someone who had been blinded would relearn how to do all these things, and that option is returned to you. They didn't have to do that, and they did. And it was, I've never seen a game handle a blind character that way before. And I just had to stop and say, holy cow. That's what you do when you write a disabled character well, is that someone feels seen. Yes, metaphorically speaking. And before I move into characters blinded by the narrative, and there's some issues, which is Y'shtola, and we'll get into it, I'm going to read back through chat and answer any questions that have happened. Give me just a moment. All right, so it looks like there's no questions, so I'm going to move on. And we get to Y'shtola. And I'm going to speed up a little bit because I've got less than 20 minutes left. So, back to what I said near the beginning of our talk. Y'shtola reads books, and why this is a huge problem. So Y'shtola is blinded by going into the live stream. And remember that earlier talk about what blindness is and disability aids? Basically that, you know, if you're wearing glasses and you can see just fine, you're not blind. It's correction after glasses that determines whether you're blind. Yeah, well, Aether Sight is just magic glasses. That's all it is. They didn't make a blind character. They made a character who has glasses with extra steps. And so here I'm going to take a little detour and talk about the 3 most common Hollywood blind tropes and why they stink. And why Y'shtola has so many problems. As far as disability representation is concerned, for those of you who are popping in now, I'm not talking about her as a character as a whole. I know I mentioned those caveats earlier. So first one, blind people trip on everything. This, as I mentioned with Ignis, can be a justified trope. people who have become blinded have trouble navigating the world because it is a sudden shock to your system. But research has been done, and I am a cane user who learned how to use a cane as an adult as well, so I can speak to this as personal experience. It takes between 6 and 12 weeks to develop a proficiency in using a long cane, or a blind cane, or a white cane. There's a lot of different terms for it. Basically, by 3 months, you should be able to walk normally again, more or less. Y'shtola has no period in which she's having any trouble. So she doesn't have this trope, but she actually has the inverse of it, which can be just as bad. There's no point in which she is having any difficulty adjusting to being blind. 2, blind people have white eyes. Ignis doesn't have this issue. Y'shtola does, and a lot of characters do, and here is where I will rag on Toph to the ends of the world as much as I love her. Most blindness does not come with white eyes. There are some forms of it that do, but most of it is things that you would get as an elderly person. I'm going to mispronounce this to heck, but Fox dystrophy, muscular degeneration, diabetic retinopathy. Most of these diseases are not things you have at birth, so somebody who's young wouldn't have them. Also, cataracts are a common way that you would have white eyes as a blind person. Blindness usually does not change the pigment of your eyes, or if it does, in very unusual ways. So, for example, I have albinism. You'll notice that my eyes in here are very, very black. I have light brown eyes, but they're not actually brown. They've got spots of brown, just little globs of brown pigment, mixed with large swaths of red. That's because I have albinism, therefore my body does not produce enough pigment, and if your body doesn't produce enough pigment, then your eyes don't either, and what you see if you don't see color in the iris is the color of the blood vessels behind it, aka red. So, Y'shtola's visual signifier that she has gone blind is to turn her eyes white. This is just not something that happens. Well, rather, it's not something that happens very often. She didn't get cataracts. And the way that they're kind of explaining it is that the life seems sucked the color out of her eyes. If they did, her eyes would turn red. Like, they wouldn't turn white. And the problem with this specific trope is that it is actually a real-world problem, is that a lot of people think that the only way that you can be blind is if you have white eyes. The trope is so pervasive that a lot of people do not believe me because my eyes are not white, even though that most people who are blind do not have white eyes. Again, it is possible, it's just not common. And last but not least, blind people have magic sight. And oh my goodness, in researching some of the actual citations in this paper, as you saw that I've been citing papers whenever I can, I just came across almost a whole subset of D&D players who want magic sight for their blind character. Again, this is the glasses with extra steps problem. If you can see out of your familiar, you're not blind. You're just wearing your familiar's eyes as glasses. They are being lazy, and these writers are cowards. They're not being creative. There's other ways that you can see. Human echolocation actually exists. It lights up the same parts of your brain that it would if you could see. It's wild, but that means that you can't see color and you can't see objects behind objects. You could still just not hit into things, but human echolocation works so well that some people can ride bikes while using it. It's crazy. These writers are cowards, and I know they can do better. So before I move on, I'm going to check to make sure that there's no questions. Would you say that Y'shtola's blindness and how it is handled is uninspired? Yeah, I think it's, I genuinely think as far as her blindness is concerned, it's very lazy writing. And I believe that I've just sort of given you the shorthand as to reason why. So, yes, they completely dropped that plot point. So someone brought up that, oh, using her Aether Sight burns through her life force. That is only in the English version of Final Fantasy XIV. That actually doesn't show up in any other versions of the game. So it's not that they retconned it, they just never brought it up again in English because they brought it more in line with the other translations. So there's no downside to her using it. Apparently it makes her a little more tired, according to the other versions, and that's sort of been cleaned up. But yeah, her Aether Sight does not, like, if she sees for a minute, it doesn't take away a minute of her life. That's not how it works. It's just, she's using her MP in the same way that I, playing a white mage, use my MP to cast spells. So, Final Fantasy XIV can do disabilities right. We saw that with Shamani Lamani. But I mean here, disabling a character and giving them a narrative. And I'm going to say if they're not real ones. And now, this is Thancred. I gotta talk about Thancred, because for everything that I think is lazy and short-sighted, pun intended, with Y'shtola, I think they do Thancred very well. So, Thancred is disabled, at least by the points of the story. So, as all of you know who play Final Fantasy XIV, Aether is important. Aether is sort of this magic force that everyone has except for the Garleans, and that is a big plot point. The fact that the Garleans, they have Aether, but they have no means of manipulating it, mean that that entire people is essentially disabled relative to the rest of everyone who lives on this planet. They can't manipulate Aether, so they've had to make adaptations to work around this. Their Aetherites work through technology so that they can still teleport across Garlemald without being able to manipulate Aether. They can't use the teleportation stones anywhere else, but within Garlemald they can. They've built technology, they've built airships, they've built so many other things to accommodate their disability. And at the same time that Y'shtola gets her blindness, Thancred basically becomes a functional Garlean. He loses his ability to manipulate Aether, which means he can no longer teleport, and he's a spy who used to be able to do that very consistently across the land. Teleportation is not something just the warrior can do. We see other characters teleport in and out of the story. It takes more work for other people to do it, because the Warrior of Light is special, but that doesn't mean that others can't, and it's very explicitly brought up. At one point during as early as 3.3, Emmerich is telling his soldiers, if you can teleport, go ahead and move forward. Like, he's giving the forward advance to his entire platoon of soldiers who have the capacity to teleport right now. Spies teleport, and he's lost that. And all jobs in Final Fantasy XIV use Aether, even the ones that are considered physical. Just going off the tanks, Warriors Beast Mode is essentially Aether. Darkanites use MP directly. Paladins cast spells. And Gunbreaker, what Thancred ends up becoming, uses Aethery charged bullets. So what does that mean for him? Unlike with Y'shtola, they actually sat down and thought, well, what does this mean for this character? Story and gameplay integration. Ludonarrative. Excuse me. Beverage. I'm sure you've heard of the term ludonarrative dissonance, which is gameplay and story separation. Basically, characters being able to do things in cutscenes that they can't do during the game. That is not the case with Thancred. He cannot teleport. This is important to the story multiple times. They don't bang it over the head, but when characters need to move somewhere that they haven't before, they have to sit and consider, well, how do we get Thancred there? How does he spy without being able to teleport? This is brought back multiple times in the story, how he's able to travel, and what his travel limitations are, as the only Scion who cannot teleport. And 2, his bullets. So, if you play it with Thancred in a trust, when he's your tank, he's a gunbreaker. He can do his 1-2-3 combo, but unless he has someone in the party with you who can prime his bullets, he cannot use any of his special attacks. He can only prime in 5.0 if Rean is in your party with you. And starting later on in the story, he teaches other people how to prime his cartridges to the point where by the time you get to the end of 6.0, you explicitly need to make a party with people who can't prime for him not to use it. So essentially, he is disabled. He has come up with a workaround in the same way that I, as a blind person who needs to navigate a new space, may, call a friend and say, hey, can you walk with me somewhere until I've memorized it? He's doing essentially the same thing. He still can't prime his cartridges. He needs a friend. Not every friend can do it. But if he's got people with him who know what to do, he has access to these skills and abilities. I think that's so cool. And it's a detail a lot of people miss. So in 5.0, it's just Rean. Between 5 and 5X, Urianger, Graha, and Y'shtola also learn how to do it. Yeah. So, and it's interesting because these are either people who are very magically skilled or people who are very close to Thancred. Urianger and Rean especially. So, how would I fix Y'shtola? How would I fix this lazy writing? Because I'm running low on time here. The answer is I wouldn't. At this point, Final Fantasy XIV has been going on for a decade, and Y'shtola has been blind for 8 of those 10 years. At this point, she's been blind, and she is not growing or changing in any way. Like, the blindness is doing nothing for her character. Adding that in now, giving her consequences now, would feel very strange. If I gave them to her, I would have given them to her when it happened. That would then, spread out over the course of the rest of the expansions. Basically, what they gave to Thancred. But would I do it now? No. It would just feel like a slap in the face. It would feel like changing something a little bit too late. But if I had written her from the time that they had decided to blind her, there would be a few changes I would make. And that would be slightly more realistic consequences. Things that she would have to sit down, learn, and overcome. Sort of like Thancred, Ignis. Like those people. Would I compare it to Shamani Lamani? No, because again, he's a character who falls in that first category. He just happens to be blind and exist in this world. She's been blinded by the plot. That means that something should happen to it. The writers have explicitly stopped to say, we need to disable this character. There need to be consequences for that. That's what's called a Chekhov's gun. That gun should fire at some point in the story, and if it's just sitting there unfired, the audience will get increasingly annoyed by it. And I certainly have. So that first thing of blind people tripping on everything, while I think it's a bad trope, if it's going on for a character who's been blinded for a long time, she does need an adjustment period. She does need to learn what her life needs to be like now that she's blind. She doesn't necessarily need a cane. Like, Aether Sight can be done well with limitations. I think Toph is actually pretty good about it. The fact that she can't see color or objects behind objects or objects inside of objects. Essentially some sort of echolocation type system. I would think that's fine. But give her time to adjust. This isn't something that anybody could learn overnight. 2, blind people having white eyes. Just don't. Or do what they did with Thancred, who did also get white eyes directly after coming out of the live stream, but he wasn't blinded. He just, the color was sucked out of his eyes. But if you look at Thancred later, his eyes have changed color again. After Shadowbringers, he's no longer wearing an eye patch. His eyes are back to his normal color. Why did they give him his eyes back, but didn't give them back to Y'shtola? They're not even internally consistent. If you are going to give her white eyes to show her that she's survived the live stream, change them back over time, even if she doesn't regain her eyesight. If you're going to insist on making her blind, and you're going to make both of them have white eyes, but he gets his eyes back, give her back too. Sorry, I only have a minute left, so I'm going to speed through the last of this. And last thing with having magic sight, give her limitations. Y'shtola can read books. Y'shtola can look at paintings, as is in Final Fantasy XIV right now. Make it so that the only ones she can read are specifically aether chemical ink. It's told out through the story. Yes, everything in 14 is made of ether, but that ink is especially conductive. The stuff that you use to make Acromania, you know, Summoner and Scholar tomes. It's brought up several times, especially in the Alchemist storylines. What if that's the only book she could read? Like, I'd be okay with that. She can't just pick up a random tome in the library, but if she wants to read or write with specifically aether-charged ink, I'd be okay with that. Like, as it stands right now, she is just wearing magic glasses. There are no consequences, and if you're going to blind a character, they should be consequences. So in conclusion, while Shimani's handled well, he's a fairly minor character. Y'shtola's blindness neither serves the plot nor forwards her character in any way. Yet, I do know that the writing team is capable of writing complex disabilities. It took Thancred to do it. And Thancred was written, his story was written concurrently with Y'shtola. He was disabled at the same time she was. But his is handled very well, and hers isn't. So I know that they can do better, but I don't think that fixing it now will actually solve that problem. I don't think that they can fix it at this point. There's not much that they can do. And I know that we could talk about Endwalker and the 85 dungeon and a couple other little things, but I am running out of time, so I'm going to call it a conclusion here. Thank you to LunarCon for this amazing panel. I'll host a Q&A outside afterwards, and I'll also cover all the questions that were asked during the Twitch stream. But I am the head of the Playframe Discord, and I wanted to thank the other people in my FC for all of their hard work with both today's panel, getting me some images, as well as yesterday's, helping me get some stuff together for the fashion show. So thank you, everybody. Don't forget to donate to Extra Life. You could possibly win some embroidery from me, and I'll take Q&A back in Final Fantasy. See you there!